Just one thing I'd want to say before we start. As a young priest working in a socioeconomically depressed part of a regional city, I used to do RE in state schools. You know, we used to have about 6 or 8 classes a week in those days. And I started off with, in this particular school, I think with about grade 3. And so I was with them in grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. And I think it was in grade 5, after I'd been with them for, this is the 3rd year, I was doing the gifts, you know, the gift of hearing and speaking and touching. And the idea was, you know, we'd say thank you to God for this beautiful gift. And how would we say thank you? Well, by the way we use it. So this was all going beautifully. And I knew their names and knew them well, and I used to play the guitar, so I didn't play it very well, but the fact that in those days that a priest knew what a guitar was and made a noise on it was pretty cool. And a couple of times we made so much noise that the principal sent somebody down to tell us to be quiet, and all the kids were saying, yes, you know, Father Hurley and us, in trouble, beautiful. So I knew them really, really well. And we were doing the gifts of speech. And so for some of you, this will be new territory. For others looking around, you'll understand. I got this new invention, the big wheel-to-wheel tape recorder. You needed a utility to get it there, and then you need an engineering degree to thread the tape through. So I managed all of that, tried it, and actually worked. And I thought, wow, this is terrific. Because what I wanted to do is get all the kids to record their voice, then listen back, be the first time they'd ever heard their own voice back again. And then I was going to say, how good is that? You know, we love God, da-da-da. What happened was, I got it going, I thought, wow, that's terrific. And it was as simple as this. I said, okay, kids, line up here. And I thought, well, they can't just grunt into this thing. And I was off the top of my head. I said, look, line up, say your name, favourite food, saddest thing in your life, happiest thing in your life. That'll do. Off you go. And the first little kid said, oh, I'm Mario. I really like lasagna. And the saddest thing in my life, when my mum died. And I didn't hear anything else. I thought, Mario, I know you. When did your mother die? And I'm not kidding you, half of those kids, the saddest thing in their life as I listened, was when one parent died or left the home. And I sat there broken-hearted because I thought, what an abject failure. I said I knew these kids. I knew nothing. I knew their name. I knew nothing about where they come from. How would that little boy feel? He comes to class the day after the death of his mother. We didn't even mention it. Could have been talking about something, making jokes or something. How would he ever see the loving God in that? And so I decided then, you know, and I've sort of lectured at university and places ever since, but I decided then I'd never talk to a class or to a group ever again, but only to individual people who've gathered in a room. I just want to acknowledge that today. I don't know where you come from. I don't know you well enough. I don't know what your home was like. I don't know what's worrying you. I don't know what's exercising your mind. And so if what I'm talking about distracts you from something important, please just switch off and do the things that you feel are important. I talked a bit in the introductory impact talk about vision therapy and understanding the way we see things, the way we see ourselves, the way we see God, the way we see other people, the way we see our wife, our husband, will actually dictate our emotional response. And I was just thinking, you know, that's true. It's absolutely true. But it's terribly interesting how people see things differently. A priest mate of mine that I'd been mates with all my priestly life, came to my ordination as a bishop, which was on a Friday. And so we did all that. On the Saturday, this is my first Mass in the cathedral. And I know how to say Mass. I hadn't forgotten that because I was a bishop. But I thought, well, got the hat on and the stick, and I thought, I want to get it right. And I said to my mate, I said, would you can celebrate? And he said, oh, yeah, he's a rough diamond. He said, yeah, no worries. And so I got through all of that. And then after communion, I said to him, because he was doing terrific work in welfare, I said, why don't you get up and tell the people a bit about your work? Which he did. And then he said, look, I've got to have my hip replaced soon. He said, so I'd like you to pray for me. He said that it goes all right. He said, they tell me it's a legacy from my mother. Not much of a legacy if you ask me. He said, but I've still got a head of black hair. I don't have any grey hairs. He said, that's from my mother too, so there you go. He said, actually, sometimes people say to me, how come you haven't got any grey hair? And he said, I tell them, it's because I'm celibate. And then he paused and looked around and he said, I have no idea what that says about your new bishop. So I said, thank you very much, sit down now. So by the time my first Mass in the cathedral was over, people were falling off their seats. So it's interesting how people see it, and sometimes, where I am, it's usually hot. Often we're just an open-neck white shirt with some crosses, which you think indicates pretty clearly to people that you're a priest or something to do with Christianity. But I was getting on the plane the other day, and the hostess, you give her the ticket thing, she said, love your badges. I said, oh, yeah, thanks very much. And there's a security man in Darwin. He's not a Catholic, but he loves me because every time I go through, and I've got to go through every time, never misses. And I must have been dressed like this going somewhere recently, and so over I go, and he has a look at me. He said, I see we've got all the bling on today. So how we see things does dictate our emotional response, but it's important to kind of understand that other people don't see things the way I do. It's just a fact. We can do what we like with it. And if I can say, perhaps a more important and more useful example, if you walk past my house or the cathedral on most nights, if you were just walking down Smith Street and looked into the space between the cathedral and where I live, you would easily, quite rightly, sort of look in and say, mob of drunken Aboriginals, and walk on. Because most of them are Aboriginal and most of them are drunk, or look drunk or are half drunk, and so you walk on. When I come home at night, most times I have a bit of a look around to see a lot of my friends and mates there that I know are having a pretty hard time. Recently, there was a mob sitting around that I didn't recognise, and I went over and just said, where's your country, where you're from? And they were from out in Arnhem Land, which is historically not a Catholic place. And I said, oh, look, you're welcome, do you want some water or something? They weren't drinking, they were just sitting around. They'd come in to see somebody in hospital and had nowhere to stay. And they said, no, pastor, which would be the title they give to their minister. And then one of them said, oh, pastor, would you pray with us? I said, of course I would, which I did. And I said, hey, you mob, how about you praying with me? He said, okay. So sit down, and they prayed away with me in their own language. And I went off to bed thinking, I am the most blessed man in the world. Where would you come home at 10 o'clock at night, meet a mob of people you've never met before, they ask you to pray with them, and then they pray with you. You walk past, saw a mob of drunken Aboriginals. Do you see the point? It really is so important that we see the reality. Not a myth, not the ideal. If it is the ideal, it has to be the reality. But we've got to see the reality, because that's where God lives. God lives in the reality of our lives and the lives of others. There's the sacred space. Families are sacred. It might be mum and me. Fair enough. That's our sacred place. That's where God dwells. And we need to sense God's presence in the reality of people's lives. Not in what we want them to be, not even what they want them to be, but as they are and as we are. So I think that whole thing of vision is so important, because vision sees the invisible and it believes the incredible and it achieves the impossible. Vision is such an important part of our spiritual life. And I think that I was saying earlier, that mercy is an experience, or it's nothing. Pope Francis called the year after the Synod on Marriage and Family, he called, before we had the Synod, he said, the year after this Synod, get it? Think about what I'm saying. The year after this Synod on the Family is going to be a year of mercy. So he was kind of flagging, like, we're going to have a Synod on the Family, and guess what? We'll need to concentrate and pray about and put into action mercy. Why? As he said at the Synod, because mercy is the law. And so that whole year of mercy was so, so, so important and so integral to the Synod on the Family. The Synod, and maybe I can just quickly say, the Synod, because I'm not being funny here, but many of us have never had the experience of a Synod. The Pope Paul VI big audience hall within the Vatican there, if you go up the stairs alongside it, you go into the Synod Hall. And there are about 300 delegates, bishops from all around the world, from Taiwan to New York. It's an extraordinary opportunity to sort of see what the church is like. People were talking to us about saying, what are you talking same-sex marriage? What about polygamy? That's our problem. Polygamy, when somebody gets married and then they take a second wife, where does that leave us? There was all this wonderful experience of the reality of people's lives from across the world.
What practical advice would you give to couples to help strengthen their marriages? What practical steps can they take to have a healthy and holy marriage?
Well, I think it depends a bit on how they've been prepared, but people that pray together stay together as a general rule, so that's not a bad start. But often in the real world, one partner is not a Catholic, maybe doesn't believe in God at all. The other person is a faithful Catholic. Now they've got to find a way of respecting each other, and they've got to find a way of sharing with their children the reality of God's love. So I think that preparation for marriage and what we would call marriage enrichment, I think it's better to say it's ongoing help. And I think that other married couples are the key to that. Because it's like, if you're talking about priests, well, I think, I've been a priest over 50 years. I've got something to say to priests about being a priest. And you've got married couples who've been married 20, 30, 40 years. They've got something to say to young couples struggling with things, that I can't say because I'm not married. But they say, listen, let me share with you this, that. And I said, did that happen to you? Of course it happened to us. Well, how did you get out of it? Well, we did this and that. Now we're in a new place and it's wonderful. But yeah, it was a struggle at the time. And young couples, I think, it's, they're happy. They've got a great thing going and they went through what we're going through. So I think that working with married couples to work with other, particularly young married couples, is absolutely key. And I think it's part of the vocation of the laity, of married people. It's part of their sacrament, I think, to help others understand the beauty of the sacrament of marriage and how to live it. So the Synod was a great experience for me. There were also lots of lay people there, people from other faiths and people from other Christian denominations. And we met in small groups, language groups, as well as the plenary. Now, in the plenary, before we went, they said, if you want to make an intervention, you'll need to write and get permission. You'll need to give a full printed copy of what you're going to say, and you've got 3 minutes. And so I thought to myself, look, I haven't got any great theological or philosophical insights that's going to change the world. Do I want to do it? And then I thought, no. I've listened to people for a whole year, and I've been a priest all my life. I've got to have something to say. I represent Australian Church. And so what I thought is that I've got experience. And I rattled through my life, and the intervention I made was this, and I won't be able to do it in 3 minutes. I'll try. But there's big clocks around the synod hall, and you sit in your seat and there's a microphone alongside it. And when you're called, your mic becomes live and you start, and the clock goes 2:59, 2:58, and when it gets to naught, your microphone shuts off, and on these big screens up on the synod hall, your mouth's going up and down like that, and no one can hear a thing, and then you disappear. And many people, and I know you wouldn't be among them, but many people said, what a good idea for homilies. But what I shared with them was this. So I share it with you. I was telling them as a parish priest one night I got a call from interstate, and the man said to me, my brother is dying in the hospital where I was. And he said, I'm just wondering if you'd go to see him. And I said, of course I will. I said, but it must have been sudden, wasn't it? He said, oh, no, he's been in there for weeks. I said, oh, I don't think so. I said, because he's not on my list and I go there nearly every day. He said, oh, he wouldn't be on your list. He dislikes priests and he hates the church. And that's why I'm talking to you. Do you still want to go? I said, of course I do. And so our conversation went on. But I went up and I went into the room because he was so ill. He was on his own in a room. And I just said to him, I was just something like this. I said, look, I'm Father Hurley. Your brother rang me. He told me that you're really, really unwell. I said, he also mentioned that you don't like priests very much or the church, and you may well tell me to nick off. I said, so if you want me to go, I'm gone. But this is too serious. I'm not going to be told to go by your brother or anyone else. If you want me to go, you tell me to go, and I'm out of here. I said, but I really would like to know what happens to you. Why do you dislike the church so much? What's happened? And he thought for a while. He said, you want to know, do you? I said, yeah, I do. He said, right, well, I will tell you. And this is the story he told me. He said, I grew up here. And he said, you know the church, which was the parish church? I said, yeah. He said, I was baptised there, made my first communion there. I got married there. I had my kids baptised there. They went to the school there, and I spent most weekends working cutting out those culverts in the, you know them? I said, I know them very well. They're pure rock. He said, that's how I spent most of the weekends. My best mate, other than my wife, parish priest. I said, man, this is going very well. And he said, it was going very, very well until my 16-year-old boy committed suicide. And he said, other than my wife, the first person I went to see as my friend and consoler was the parish priest, who said to me, well, because he committed suicide, he cannot be buried in the Catholic Church. And he said, A, I was heartbroken, and B, I decided then and there that I'd never come back. And he said, and I brought my kids up to hate the church. So you want to know? Now you know. And I said at this synod, I stood there embarrassed, sad, but also thinking, I can't fix this. And I said, look, I'm so sorry. I said, it should never have happened. It wasn't right then. All of that. And he sort of just laid there. And then I said to him, look, mate, I said, I can't fix this. I wish I could, but I can't. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And then it's up to you. But I'm just telling you what I'm going to do now, and then the rest is your business. I said, I'm going to kneel by your bed and I'm going to ask for your forgiveness. For me, for the church. I said, and you can, if you think about this, I said, it's probably an opportunity to give the church the biggest send-off in history. I said, I reckon that might make you feel better. I said, or you might dig deep within yourself somewhere and actually forgive the church. I said, I think that could even begin some healing, but that's none of my business. None of that's my business. I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. And so I knelt down and asked his forgiveness. And it seemed to take an age, but it probably didn't. And I can't remember what he said, but he said something like, oh, I suppose so, which was terrific of the man. And so I got up and thanked him. I said, and now I'm your priest. Make an act of sorrow and I'll bring you God's forgiveness, which I did and he did. And then I said, look, mate, I said, I'm pushing the envelope a little bit here. I said, but I would really like to go and get your Holy Communion. And this man who hated priests, hated the church, said, I'd love that. So I went and got him Holy Communion. And by the time I come back, all his family had gathered. And I walked in and I said, look, I'm sorry. I didn't realise you had your family with you. I'll wait. And he said, no, come in. I want you in here. So I came in and he explained to the people what had happened. And then he said, and Father's brought me Holy Communion. And then they all felt a bit uncomfortable because this was not their scene at all. So they were kind of shuffling to go. And I said to them, look, I would like you to stay. This is a really important moment for Mum and Dad and everybody. And it's an important moment for me. I think Dad would want you to stay. So they all stayed, gave them communion, gave them the last rites and all those things. And I went away from there thinking, how could we do this to people? Where's the love of God in that? Where's the merciful touch of Jesus Christ and what we've done to that man? And so that's what I shared with the synod. And it was terribly interesting going back to that little English group because there was a Canadian Lutheran bishop in our group. And as we were walking back, he said to me, I really appreciated what you said. And I said, oh, thanks very much. And he said, no. He said, it meant a lot to me. He said, because last year my young boy committed suicide and our church wouldn't bury him. And it's amazing, isn't it, how you run into those things. This is the reality of people's lives. And so that was my contribution to the synod. And I'm happy I made it, and I think it made a point. And certainly, different people found it a bit helpful. But again, it was the reality of my life and the reality of this young man's, well, he wasn't so young then, his life, and the intersection of the church with the reality of people's lives. As he says there are two ways of thinking, and I'm saying vision. There are two ways of visioning which recur throughout the church's history: casting off and reinstating. And in Amoris Laetitia, it says that the church's way from the time of the Council of Jerusalem has always been the way of Jesus, the way of mercy and reinstatement. The way of the church is not to condemn anyone forever. It's to pour out the balm of God's mercy on those who ask for it with a sincere heart. That's a lovely image of the church. And there could be nothing less like that than the reality I ran into that night. This is what the church is about, and that's what it wasn't about. And it crucified that man and his family.
Shalom World brings to you the Catholic faith in all its different dimensions. It can be a faith to inspire you in
in your own living of your Catholic life in society. Shalom World offers you an opportunity of being enriched and strengthened in your family life. We live in a culture that needs to have a Catholic presence. We live in a culture that needs to be evangelized by the presence of Catholic teaching and the inspiration to live according to our Catholic way of life. I recommend to you to be involved in the work of Shalom World. May the Lord bless you and bless the work of Shalom World. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Shalom World, God's own channel.